What's up, guys? Hope you're having a good day. We are back after a week off last week with no UFC events. Very rare weekend with no UFC card. We're now back for the busy autumn UFC schedule. We've pretty much got back-to-back UFC events every weekend now until the end of November. So I hope you made the most of last week. I certainly did. I took the family away to Ibiza for a week. Very nice holiday, very nice vacation. Now I'm back refreshed, ready to finish the year strong. As you guys know, I make a living from live betting on MMA, and at the moment there's a very rare opportunity for you guys to join my live betting group. The live betting group that I run is pretty much permanently sold out. For most of the last 3 years it has been sold out, but at the moment I do have a very small number of places available. So if you'd like to join in on the action, gain access to my live betting tips and alternate fight commentary, you now can. You've probably never heard me talk about this before, advertise it before. Very rare that spaces become available, so it's a very rare opportunity for you to jump on board. If you want to know what live betting is, it's basically placing bets as the fight takes place. So if you're interested in joining, all you need to do is come to my website, MMABettingTips.com, link for that in the description below. Scroll down, click in-play membership, and then you've got a couple of options to sign up. I know it looks expensive, but trust me, I think you're going to like it a lot. Give it a try. If you don't like it, just DM me, send me a message, do whatever you need to do to get in touch with me. I'm pretty accessible. I'll give you a refund anyway. So a couple spaces available at the moment. They don't come up very often. Give it a try. I don't think you'll be disappointed. When people join, they don't tend to leave for a very, very long time. If you look at the results from how I've performed on live betting over the years, you can see one of the best looking profitability charts you'll ever see. Nice, steady, consistent gains over a very long period of time, and we do really, really well in live betting. So I know, a lot of you are from the United States. In recent years, betting sites in the US have started to offer live betting. Give it a try. I think you'll like it a lot. Jump on board. Like I say, spaces don't come up very often, so this might be a last chance to join for a while. Anyway, now let's move on to breaking down some fights. It's a great card, this. UFC Fight Night Paris. Some awesome matchups for us to dive into. And obviously in this video, we're going to be breaking down all of the fights from the main card. Some super juicy fights for us to dive into. Now, if you'd like breakdown videos for all the other fights on this card, all of the prelim matchups, again, head on over to my website, MMABettingTips.com. Link to that in the description below. On there, you'll find breakdown videos for every single fight and every single UFC card, as well as all my bets for every single type of bet that you can place pre-fight. Right, you'll find over/unders on my website, prop bets, straight money line bets, all kinds of stuff. They're all pretty much profitable over a long period of time, so give it a try. I think you'll like it a lot. Link in the description below. And before we dive into breaking these fights down, one last thing that I've got to say is that this is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. Everything that I'm sharing with you in this video is for entertainment purposes only. I'm just sharing my opinions, my thoughts, my views on these fights, and it's really, really important to gamble responsibly. Making money from betting on anything is one of the most hardest things you can do in the world, because you look at Las Vegas, wasn't built off winners. It's extremely difficult to just float around break even betting on any sport. It's damn near a goddamn miracle if you can make a profit. So it's extremely difficult. Social media can be very misleading. You go onto social media, it seems like everyone's profitable on betting, which can make you think it's like some super lucrative opportunity to make loads of money. The reality is that if you want to make a lot of money betting sports, often takes a lot of hard work. You see these guys on Instagram in their hotel rooms in Gucci tracksuits, big gold chains, driving Bentleys, with loads of girls, loads of cash on the table. It's all bollocks. If they were really making a lot of money from sports betting, they wouldn't have time to do all that shit. I do make a living from sports betting. It comes from a lot of hard work, a lot of blood, a lot of sweat, a lot of tears, a lot of years of experience. Most of my time is spent chained to this desk. I don't have time to travel. I don't have time to go out and fuck around, in fancy cars and, mess around partying all the time, because this is a full-time job and it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of research and discipline to be successful at this. I do make a living from betting, so all the information I'm going to be sharing with you in this video is coming from over a decade of experience, a lot of hard work. I've spent hours researching these fights that I'm going to be talking to you about today. So while you know, it is important to do your own research and gamble responsibly. What I can also say is the information I'm going to be sharing with you in this video is coming from a good place. A lot of hard work, a lot of time, a lot of research, a lot of experience. But as ever, do your own research, fact check what I'm saying, cross-reference, you know, all the stuff I've shared with you in this video yourself. And hopefully you'll find the information I'm going to share useful. Gamble responsibly. It's bloody difficult to make money betting on anything in life. I should know. It has been a long, hard road to get to where I am now. So let's kick things off, not with Christian Quinones. Let's kick things off by breaking down the main event at this weekend's card, which is Ciryl Gane versus Tai Tuivasa. Two popular fighters, two great fighters, not the most interesting fight from a betting point of view, and in my opinion, quite a strange matchup. I don't understand why the UFC have put this fight together. I think it's quite clear what they're doing here. If we take a look at the odds, we can see that Ciryl Gane is the biggest favourite on the card. Average odds of around 1.18, which is going to be minus 556 for an implied probability of 85%. If we take a look at the odds on Tuivasa, he is around an average of 5.10, which is plus 410 for an implied probability of 20%. So the odds tell the story of how difficult of a fight this is for Tai Tuivasa, and that's why this matchmaking doesn't make much sense to me. I think it's quite clear what the UFC are trying to do. They're trying to give Ciryl Gane a layup here. They're trying to give him an easy fight. They're trying to give him a very winnable matchup because, of course, this event is taking place in Paris, France. Ciryl Gane is a French fighter, and we see the UFC do this all the time on regional shows. They like to give the hometown guys favourable matchups that they should win so that they can entertain their home fans, please the crowd, and put on a great show. The UFC is the mixed martial arts is a sport, the UFC is a sport, but they're also in the entertainment business. And by matching up these hometown fighters with guys they should beat pretty easily, they give the people, the fans, the customers that pay their hard-earned money for the tickets a great experience on the night. We see them do this all the time. The UFC have done some events in London recently where they gave guys like Paddy Pimblett very favourable matchups against someone like Jourdain Leavitt. And of course Nathaniel Wood, they gave Charles Rosa. Very, very easy fights. And they're doing it again this weekend where Ciryl Gane is being given an easy matchup against Tai Tuivasa. Benoit Saint-Denis, a relatively easy fight against Gabriel Miranda. So they've used this blueprint to build their company. But what I don't understand is why they've picked Tai Tuivasa as the sacrificial lamb here. Tai Tuivasa is such an interesting, likeable, charismatic character and someone that everybody loves. I think the heavyweight division in general is quite boring. It lacks characters. It lacks interesting, likeable characters. Aside from Derek Lewis and Tai Tuivasa, there aren't really that many interesting characters in the heavyweight division. So I don't understand why the UFC are throwing Tuivasa to the wolves here when there are plenty of other guys they could have thrown in against Gane who would have been just as easy a fight for Gane, but it wouldn't have had to have derailed one of the most exciting fighters in the division in Tai Tuivasa. This very strange matchup. I think you could have built Tuivasa and Gane up together. You didn't need to kind of, kill the momentum of one of these guys. It doesn't really make much sense to me. I guess from the UFC's point of view, they're thinking, well, if Tuivasa wins, it's going to fast track him into the title picture. But realistically, what are the odds on that happening? I mean, according to the bookies, not very high. 20% chance to be specific if you look at the implied probability on Tuivasa's odds. So, if we start off by taking a look at the tail of the tape, even just here, it's not good for Tai Tuivasa. Gane, 32 years old, 6'4" with an 83-inch reach, whereas Tuivasa, 29 years old, 6'2" with a 75-inch reach. So in this instance, Ciryl Gane's going to have a massive 8-inch reach advantage over Tuivasa, which is bad news because we know Gane is someone that knows how to use it. He does a great job of using his length to chip away at his opponents from a safe distance, and he throws a very high volume of strikes, a volume that Tuivasa is simply not going to be able to compete with. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, it's pretty much the worst stylistic matchup imaginable for Tuivasa. If we start off by focusing on the striking, we know that Ciryl Gane is a guy that likes to be the aggressor. He likes to take control of the centre of the octagon, forces opponents to fight on the outside, and he uses his length and his incredible ability to control the distance to keep his opponents at arm's length and just chip away at them from a safe distance. He throws a high volume of strikes, a very diverse range of strikes with his jabs, his long punches, his range-finding kicks. And there aren't many heavyweights. In fact, there aren't any heavyweights which can keep up with the volume of Ciryl Gane, and Tuivasa's no different. Gane really knows how to use that 8-inch reach advantage, and he's very, very good at reading his opponents. Every time his opponent, changes their body language to come forward and attack him, he's very good at reading that and just slipping slightly further back out of a range where he can't be hit unless his opponent really bites down on the mouthpiece and blitzes forward to cover distance. Now, Tuivasa does do that. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a moment, but let's first finish talking about how these guys look at distance, because fighting at distance is where Ciryl Gane wants to be. He wants to be the aggressor. He wants to be forcing you to fight in an uncomfortable range, but he's also fighting at distance. He's just not giving you much space to breathe or move, because he wants to keep you right on that outside with your back pinned against the cage, where he can control the way you move and not give you as much space in the octagon to move around and defend yourself when he attacks you. So, if you look at how they match up at distance, Tai Tuivasa is known for predominantly being a boxer. You think of his big knockout wins, right? His big power in his hands. But if you actually go and watch some of Tai Tuivasa's fights, you'll see that at distance, his boxing is totally ineffective. I know that this fight was a long time ago now, but the best fight you can watch to see what, the point I'm trying to make is his fight against Blagoy Ivanov, where Tuivasa stood right in front of Ivanov for 15 minutes and his boxing just looked very sloppy. Now, I know Tai is a young guy, and I know this fight took place a long time ago, so there's scope for Tuivasa to have improved within that time. But if you look at his boxing since the Ivanov fight, it doesn't look like it's improved that much. Tuivasa just isn't someone that's evolving or improving in any area really, other than his leg kicking game. His striking and grappling pretty similar to how he looked when he first came into the UFC. And so even though the Ivanov fight took place a long time ago, there's also flashes of the same issues with his boxing in his more recent fights, except it's not so obvious because his recent fights have ended so quickly. So it's not as easy for me to point you to certain fights where you'll see that weakness, but it's glaringly obvious in the Ivanov matchup. Tuivasa is just someone that's not that accurate with his boxing. He's not that technical with his boxing. And again, he just really struggles to land at distance, which is a huge problem against someone like Ciryl Gane, who's great at landing from distance, great at reading you, great at chipping away at you from a safe distance. So even though Tuivasa's wins have come from big power punches, big knockouts, that tends to come from when he's blitzing forward aggressively or baiting guys into these big, crazy, reckless exchanges, like we've seen him, drag Derek Lewis and Augusto Sakai, and in particular Greg Hardy into. If you think about the finishes of Greg Hardy and Derek Lewis, it was, in close proximity, in that phone booth range. Both guys stood 1 feet apart from one another, swinging for the fences. Gane doesn't really play that game. He likes to chip away at you from a safe distance. Tuivasa's best weapons when it comes to striking are actually his leg kicks. Tuivasa throws devastating leg kicks, really impactful, powerful leg kicks, fast leg kicks. And leg kicks are also very difficult to see coming, very difficult to read. Tuivasa does a great job of disguising them well. That's Tuivasa's best weapon. The problem is that Gane doesn't really fight in a range where those leg kicks are going to be there for him, because he fights at such a big distance between him and his opponent. In order to get to Gane and land on him, you've got to cover distance. Tuivasa, the way he throws his leg kicks, are not thrown in a way that he will come forward and cover distance to land them. He prefers to land the leg kicks when you're stood right in front of him, and we know Gane won't play that game. So I'm sure Tuivasa is going to land some nasty leg kicks in this fight, but I don't think he's going to be as effective with them as he would be against more flat-footed opponents, like, for example, an Augusto Sakai or a Harry Hunsucker. In terms of striking, though, even though for the most part it's a really difficult stylistic matchup for Tuivasa because of how ineffective he is at distance and how effective Gane is at distance, with how good he is defensively, how good he is at reading his opponents. There is something that Tai does very well, which can potentially cause Gane a problem. And that's that when Tai blitzes forward and commits to coming forward and attacking his opponents, he goes all in. And if you go back and watch any of Ciryl Gane's fights, you'll see that while Gane's defense looks very, very good at distance, when you blitz him, he looks very, very hittable. Like, his defense goes out the window. If you bum rush Ciryl Gane, his chin will be up high and exposed, his hands will be down low, and he'll just look to circle away from you. But in that process of circling away, he's very hittable. So when a guy like Tai Tuivasa goes all in and fully commits to coming forward and letting his hands go, there's a very real chance he can catch Ciryl Gane with something big, because in those sequences, Gane's very, very vulnerable to big shots. Now, it isn't easy to knock guys out who are moving away from you. It isn't easy to knock guys out who won't engage. But Tuivasa, very, very heavy-handed. Big, legit one-shot KO power. Perhaps he can catch Gane with something big. But Tuivasa, with his blitzing attacks, quite often ends up, instead of landing big shots as he's blitzing forward, quite often ends up just running into his opponents, tying up with them and battling out for position in the clinch. He's not the most accurate puncher, and as a result, Gane does have some room for error here. It's not like he's facing a devastatingly accurate power puncher, someone like a Francis Ngannou or a Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Tuivasa is a little bit sloppy, especially when he's blitzing forward, because he's got to think about covering the distance, not getting hit, and also, landing a big shot. So that's why he often misses with his shots when he blitzes forward. So on the feet, very good stylistic matchup for Gane, but there's an opportunity for Tuivasa to just hulk out and land a big shot when he blitzes forward. Gane's not particularly good at being pressured like that. For that reason, very difficult fight for Tuivasa. We know he's a striker, and aside from a puncher's chance when he kind of blitzes forward, there's no way he's going to be able to outstrike Gane in this matchup. Gane is just too technical, too good defensively, moves too well. Now, in terms of grappling, what's interesting about this fight is grappling is the weakness of both of these guys, right? We saw what Francis Ngannou did to Ciryl Gane in his last matchup, and the takedown offense and ground game of Tai Tuivasa has been an issue for him since he came into the UFC. And despite spending a bit of time at American Kickboxing Academy, Tai just hasn't improved his takedown offense or ground game at all. He still has absolutely no takedown defense, and he still has no idea what he's doing on the ground. It's almost like he's never taken a BJJ class. He's very, very weak off his back. So even though both these guys are primarily strikers, the easiest path to victory for Ciryl Gane here is to grapple. Even though Gane isn't great on the ground, I think if he did come in with a grappling heavy game plan, he would absolutely dominate here and take away the one weapon, the one chance that Tuivasa's got of winning this, which is, landing a big shot on the feet and knocking him out. So the smartest thing for Gane to do here would be to use grappling to take Tuivasa down, beat him up on the ground. But I don't see that happening, because we've said this about Ciryl Gane in the past when he fought guys like Jairzinho Rozenstruik and Alexander Volkov. We know that both Volkov and Rozenstruik have poor takedown defense, low-level ground games, and when breaking those fights down, we were saying, look, these matchups are going to be a cakewalk for Ciryl Gane if he comes in with a grappling-heavy game plan. And he barely shot a takedown in either of those fights. If you go on Fight Metric, you'll certainly see takedown attempts from Gane in both of those matchups. But to the trained eye, if you know what you're looking for, Gane really didn't try to take either of those guys down. Sure, he might have gone for some half-assed takedown attempts and, driven them into the cage and beat them up in the clinch a little bit. But in terms of fully committing to a takedown, he didn't fully commit to a single takedown against Volkov nor Rozenstruik, and so I don't see him committing to takedowns against Tuivasa either. So while that is a clear and obvious path to victory for Gane, we know that fighters love to make life difficult for themselves and often do not take the easiest path to victory, so I wouldn't expect to see a lot of grappling from Gane this weekend. So let's sum it all up from a betting point of view. Very, very dead fight for betting. You cannot bet Ciryl Gane as such a big favourite, because at the end of the day, anything can happen in MMA. only takes one shot to land to knock Cyril Gane out, and Tuivasa hits extremely hard. While Tuivasa does only have a puncher's chance in this matchup, his puncher's chance is a hell of a lot more live than a lot of guys because of how hard this guy hits. But because Gane is so good defensively, because he moves so well, and because Tuivasa's boxing's not great, the probability of Tuivasa landing a bomb in this matchup isn't great, especially when you look at the fact that most of Tuivasa's knockouts come from, him baiting guys into big reckless exchanges, and Gane isn't really the kind of guy that's going to play that game. One of Gane's biggest strengths is his ability to fight tactically, fight smart, and stick to a game plan. And he's just not going to be getting into those big exchanges, or at least it's very unlikely. And we've also spoken about how Gane's got a huge advantage on the ground. For those reasons, even though Tuivasa could pull off a Hail Mary knockout here, for me it's not that likely, and as a result, I'm not interested in betting on Tuivasa as a big underdog either. So this fight is a very, very easy pass for me. I will not be betting it, but I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's break down the co-main event between Marvin Vettori and Robert Whittaker. Let's start off by taking a look at the odds. We can see that Robert Whittaker is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.47, which is minus 213 for an implied probability of 68%. If we take a look at the odds on Marvin Vettori, he's around an average of 2.90, which is plus 190 for an implied probability of 34%. Marvin Vettori, 28 years old, 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach, and Robert Whittaker is 31 years old, 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach. So both guys pretty much the same age, pretty much the same size, but at very different stages of their career. Both these guys are on completely different career trajectories at the moment, where Vettori is still young, hungry, motivated, and whereas Robert Whittaker has been there, done it all, seen it all, got the t-shirt, he's obviously been the welterweight champion, and as a result, the middleweight champion, and as a result, hasn't got that fire that he used to have. I think when you look at this matchup, stylistically, it's a really, really good fight for Robert Whittaker, because aside from pure Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I think Robert Whittaker is better than Marvin Vettori in every single aspect of MMA. Skill for skill, there's nowhere that Vettori has an advantage, apart from, like I say, pure BJJ, but this ain't a BJJ contest, and it's unlikely Vettori's going to be able to get Whittaker on the ground and keep him on the ground for long enough for that advantage in BJJ to even make a difference. So it's a very good stylistic matchup for Whittaker. We'll go into a little bit more detail into the reasons why in a little bit. But what's interesting about this matchup is that there's so much more that determines the outcome of MMA fights. If betting on MMA and making money from MMA and predicting winners was as simple as betting on the more skilled fighter, then we'd all be millionaires, because it's really easy to identify who the more skilled fighter is in every single matchup. We can all do that. You can train anyone to do that. But we know that there's so much more that goes into it. GSP said that fighting was 90% mental. And so often we see fight IQ, strategy, game planning, decision making as the difference in matchups. And while Whittaker throughout his career has been strong in all those areas, tough as nails, bulletproof mentality, he was perhaps not the most skilled guy in his title run, but he was one of the toughest, one of the hardest to break, one of the most well-rounded, and that's what made him so formidable, during his title run. But at this stage in their careers, you've got to ask, what is Whittaker still fighting for? He's flirted with the idea of retirement in the past. He doesn't have that same fire that he used to. He doesn't fight with the same aggression that got him to the dance, that got him to a title. And on top of that, this is his first fight back after losing a second title fight against Israel Adesanya. Post-title fight blues are a very real thing, and Whittaker may be struggling to find the same motivation at this stage in his career after a big setback, losing that title fight to Izzy. What's motivating Whittaker coming into this matchup? What's driving him? What's giving him that fire in the belly to wake up every morning and train hard, to take on a young, hungry, ambitious bull like Marvin Vettori? Because skill for skill, like I say, I think Whittaker has got an advantage over Vettori everywhere. apart from perhaps mentally. And it feels crazy to say that about a guy like Robert Whittaker, that is an incredible fighter, that's had a bulletproof mentality throughout his entire career. But when you look at a guy like Marvin Vettori, for all of his weaknesses, and there are many, we know with 95% certainty this weekend that Marvin Vettori is 100, well, I can't say 100%, but we know with 95% certainty that Marvin Vettori is showing up to fight this weekend. He's ruthlessly consistent. He is young, hungry, motivated, and in his own mind, he believes he's the best fighter in the world. He still talks about the fact that he thinks he won both of the Izzy fights. He believes he's the best fighter in the world, and he's young, hungry, motivated, and that counts for a lot. He's the kind of guy you have to practically kill in order to beat, and you know, no matter how he's feeling, he's going to show up and give 110% on Saturday night. I don't feel the same could be said about Whittaker. Like I say, he's flirted with the idea of retirement in the past, and when fighters start to talk about retirement, mention the R word, it's usually the beginning of the end. And I know Whittaker's very young at 31 years old. He's an absolute baby at 31 years old for a middleweight. However, he has had close to 30 pro fights. He's been a champion. He's been around for a long time, taken a lot of damage, been in a lot of wars. What left does he have to give? How motivated is he? Motivation is a crazy thing. And Vettori's definitely the more motivated coming in this weekend. Could be wrong, but I think it's a big factor to consider if you're betting this fight. Now, in terms of how they match up stylistically, on the feet, which is where I would expect this fight to take place, I would expect this to be a stand-up fight. On the feet, it's difficult for Vettori. Even though both these guys on paper are roughly the same size, they move in very different ways. We know that Whittaker started his career in the welterweight division, and he's very fast, very light on his feet, great cardio, throws a high volume of strikes. Vettori, on the other hand, we saw him fight at light heavyweight against Paulo Costa. Obviously, a lot of that was due to Costa struggling to make the middleweight limit. But Vettori doesn't fight like a middleweight. He fights like a guy in a much higher weight class. He's got that slow, flat-footed, plodding style. There's a real heaviness to everything that he does. And as a result, Whittaker's going to have a huge speed advantage in this matchup. He's so much faster than Vettori. And I think for that reason, he can cause Vettori big problems on the feet. We know that Whittaker likes to stay light on his feet, chip away at the lead leg with leg kicks, pump the jab, follow through with a big right hand, maybe occasionally go upstairs with a big head kick. But Whittaker is a lot better defensively than Vettori, a lot faster. He just moves better and throws a higher volume of strikes. Vettori's probably a better boxer than Whittaker, like a pure boxer. But the footwork and the movement and the speed of Whittaker will make it difficult for Vettori to get to Whittaker and land significant strikes because of how much slower Vettori is. Just feel Whittaker's much sharper than him on the feet. So if the fight stays standing, I think you're going to see a lot of footwork, a lot of movement from Whittaker, just kind of dancing around Vettori, chipping away at him. Now, we know Vettori's got a great chin. He's tough as nails. Not going to be easy for Whittaker to slow Vettori down and stop him from coming forward, because we know Vettori's an aggressive pressure fighter. But we've seen Whittaker deal with all kinds of strikers in the past. He's very experienced, and Vettori's pressure's not going to faze him. I think Whittaker will be more than happy to dance around Vettori all night and just chip away at him. So stylistically, it is good news for Whittaker on the feet. Now, in terms of grappling, Vettori's a really strong grappler. We know this, and we have seen him use grappling heavy game plans in the past. The Kevin Holland fight springs to mind. But Marvin Vettori is one of these guys that does tend to slow down as fights wear on. And Vettori's also one of these guys that the more he grapples, the faster he slows down, which is why you don't see tons of grappling from him against guys like Paulo Costa and Israel Adesanya, who are harder to take down and control on the ground. You saw tons of grappling from Vettori against Kevin Holland because Holland was easy to take down and hold down, so Vettori didn't have to exert too much energy to get the fight to the ground. But Vettori is very conscious that the more he grapples, the more he gasses, and as a result, he does a good job of pacing himself by picking and choosing when to grapple hard. So I don't think we're going to see any grappling from Vettori in this fight, because Robert Whittaker is extremely difficult to take down and almost impossible to hold down. If you take Whittaker to the ground, he can pop back up to his feet, like a spring. Extremely difficult to hold him down. So I don't think Vettori is going to waste energy grappling here, because he knows that the amount of energy he would have to exert to get Whittaker to the ground and hold him down with, chain wrestling and persistent grappling, it just isn't going to be worth it, because he's going to have to exert so much energy to achieve so little in return with how difficult Whittaker is to hold down. So for that reason, even though Whittaker is the superior grappler out of the two, even though Vettori is the superior grappler out of the two, I don't feel we're going to see a whole lot of grappling from Vettori. So to summarise how I feel about this fight from a betting point of view, again, I don't like a bet on either side here. I understand why Whittaker's the favourite. He's not going to be, in any trouble really on the ground, because I don't think Vettori's going to commit, hard enough to his grappling to take this fight to the ground. And on the feet, Vettori doesn't really have big power in his hands. He's more of a volume striker, so there's not that much of a risk of Whittaker getting knocked out. And of course, we know Whittaker's tough as nails with an amazing chin. He just went the distance with Izzy, went the distance with Gastelum, Cannonier, Till. All these guys are very, very dangerous strikers. Perhaps Vettori can, land something big and knock him out, but Vettori's a far less dangerous striker than someone like Gerard Cannonier and Israel Adesanya. So pretty unlikely Vettori gets a knockout here. And a pretty comfortable fight on the feet for Whittaker. Like I say, much faster, throws a higher volume of strikes, better defensively, should be able to chip away at Vettori and outstrike him on the feet. So I understand why Whittaker's the favourite. As a result, it's a very difficult fight for betting, because you've got to let the odds do the work for you. If you look at the odds, he's around about a 1.44 favourite, which is minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. If I researched this fight and they were both these young, hungry bulls on the up and up who are both, battling for a title shot, I would strongly consider betting Whittaker. But I do worry about post-title fight blues. I do worry about how motivated Whittaker is coming into this fight. I do worry about what he's fighting for. I have seen over the last 15 years since I started betting on MMA, time and time and time again, when guys mention retirement, it is the beginning of the end. When they mention the R word, it's only a matter of time before the wheels come off and one night they show up looking a shadow of themselves and they just significantly underperform because they just don't have the fire anymore, the will to win, the desire to keep fighting. That's why I'm not interested in taking Whittaker as a big favourite. But on the flip side, you look at Vettori. It's tough to take a shot on the underdog as well, because when you look at Vettori and you ask yourself, how does this guy win? Well, the only way he wins is if Whittaker underperforms, because we know Whittaker is the better striker and we know Whittaker is skilled enough to prevent Vettori from, using his grappling. So I can't bet on Vettori here, because his only chance of winning is if Whittaker doesn't show up and perform well, which is quite rare because Whittaker is an elite athlete who, even around the time where he was talking about retirement and losing that motivation, was still a pretty formidable opponent who was beating a lot of tough guys in the division. So for that reason, I'm going to pass on this. I do think Whittaker wins, but I just think with him being such a big favourite, it's just not that attractive to me to bet him at these odds. If they were closer to that even money odds range, for sure I would take a bet on Whittaker. But you've got to hit a win rate of about 75% to make any kind of meaningful profit betting fighters in this odds range. And winning 75% of bets in any odds range is an extremely difficult thing to do. So when I see guys like Whittaker in this odds range, I really just have to ask myself, is this a super, super, super strong position where Whittaker has pretty much no way to lose? And if the answer to that question is no, then I should probably pass. And in this instance, the answer to that question is definitely no, so I'm going to pass. Hope you found that useful. Now let's move on to talking about an interesting matchup between Alessio Di Chirico and Roman Kopylov. So let's start off by taking a look at the odds on this one. One of the most interesting fights on the card from a betting point of view, because these two guys are in the even money odds range. As you can see, both guys are around odds of about 1.91, which is minus 110 for an implied probability of 52%. So this fight's 50-50 in the eyes of the bookies. As you guys know, I absolutely love betting fights in the even money odds range, because if you can just slightly lean 60-40 one way or the other, you can find, a good margin over the bookies. And as you guys know, I perform very well on fights in the even money odds range. I bet a lot of them. So, Alessio Di Chirico, 32 years old, 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach. Roman Kopylov, 31 years old, 6 foot tall with a 75-inch reach. And both these guys have struggled bad in the UFC. We can see that Di Chirico is 1-4 in his last 5, and Kopylov has lost both his fights in the UFC. So this could be a good old-fashioned WWE style loser leaves town fight, where we know when guys are performing like this on paper, it's not going to be too long before the UFC rips their contract up and releases them from the promotion. So it's a massive fight for both these guys, and a really, really good fight as well. So it's a complex matchup, this, because when it comes to Alessio Di Chirico, even at the age of 32, I feel like he's very much a fighter that is still discovering himself. When he first came into the UFC, he used to come out the gate very aggressive, put a crazy pace on his opponent, drag them into a crazy war, and just look to outdog it, or outdog them, out-tough them, and just kind of break them. But because Di Chirico used to come out the gate so hard and fight at such a high pace, what always used to happen in the early days of Di Chirico's career is that he would go too hard, he wouldn't pace himself very well, and then he'd burn himself out and gas out very quickly, to the point where he was completely ineffective in the second half of the fight. As a result of that, Di Chirico learned midway through his career in the UFC that his style of just coming out the gate super hard, trying to kill everyone in round one, was unsustainable, because if he didn't get the job done in round one, he would obviously gas out and struggle bad in the second half of the fight. So for that reason, Di Chirico made big adjustments, where he started to fight a lot more strategically and a lot more tactically. Now the problem with Di Chirico is that he's looked at the blueprint set out by super successful fighters like Jose Aldo and George St. Pierre to develop a style of fighting that is very effective when executed correctly, but Di Chirico hasn't really executed it correctly. His interpretation of it is slightly off, which is why he's lost so many fights, over the last few years. So what we now see from Di Chirico is he's gone the complete other end of the spectrum, where when he came into the UFC, he was very aggressive, he fought at a high pace, and now he's very tentative, very passive, and in my opinion, overly strategic and overly tactical. You really do need to have good fight IQ, good strategy, and good tactics to make it to the elite level, the top level of the UFC. But it's a fine line between being very tactical and strategic and being very predictable and easy to read. And I feel Di Chirico's kind of fallen into that trap. He has ordered the George St. Pierre instructional DVDs on how to win MMA fights off eBay and just taken all the advice way too literally. What you now see from Di Chirico is a whole lot of nothing for the first 4.5 minutes of a round, and then in the final 30 seconds to 1 minute of every round, Di Chirico suddenly springs to life, gets crazy aggressive, and looks to just bum rush his opponent and steal the round. Now, the scoring criteria states that immediate impact outweighs cumulative effect, and we know that judges are supposed to and love to score rounds in favour of fighters who finish the round stronger. The business end of the round, in the final minute and a half, is what can count for a lot in the scoring of a round. And we saw guys like Jose Aldo and George St. Pierre build successful careers from always making sure that they finished rounds strong. It's the reason why both those guys won so many decisions throughout their career. It's because they always influenced the judges at the business end of the round where it really counted. And now you see the Chirico making a conscious effort to do that. So now, instead of being super aggressive and wild and reckless like he was in his early days, he's very passive and tentative now for the first 4 minutes of every round, and then he goes ham in the final minute of the round. Now, this is great because he doesn't gas out anymore, because he's not committing so much energy to kill his opponents early. He's pacing himself better, so that's good. And he's obviously using a tried and tested strategy that's very effective to try to win MMA fights. But why isn't it working for him? Why is he still losing? Well, the reason being, again, he's taken that advice too literally, and he's applying that strategy too literally, because he literally does almost nothing for 4 minutes of a round and then really goes for it in the final minute. And the problem with this is it leaves him very little margin for error, because with his style over the last few years, you can pretty much guarantee that anyone he fights is going to outpoint him for the majority of the round. And so he doesn't leave himself any room for error. If when he goes for it in the final minute of every round, he doesn't achieve his goals, perhaps his opponent just circles away from him and he doesn't land anything, or perhaps he does have a bit of success but it's not enough to trump the previous 4 minutes of work from his opponent. Or say, for example, he gets caught with some big shots and loses that final minute of the round, which is what happened in one of the rounds in his fight against Zach Cummins, where he got knocked down late through being overly aggressive and reckless. Then he leaves himself very little room for maneuver, no room for error, because he's trying to win fights based on the final minute of every round, which is a dangerous strategy. It can work well, but you really need to do some shit beforehand so that rounds are visually close, and then go out and put your stamp on the round in the final minute than just banking on that final minute to get the job done and win the round. So that's what's costing the Chirico at the moment. But what I will say is that I like that he's trying. You see fighters with bad fight IQ, bad game planning, and bad strategy throughout their entire careers. They don't improve, they don't make any adjustments, and it continues to be a big issue throughout their entire career. Right? There's loads of guys like this. I like that the Chirico is making the effort to improve. It's just he hasn't quite got it right yet. But maybe he'll get it right this weekend. At the end of the day, fighters are on a continuous journey of self-improvement. One of the reasons why making money betting on MMA is so difficult is because fighters are always improving. Fighters are always tightening up weaknesses. I always use the analogy of MMA being like a game of heads-up poker where both fighters can see their opponent's hand. Right? The Chirico can do exactly what we can do. Kopylov can do exactly what we can do. We can go and watch all of the Chirico's past fights. We can go watch all of Kopylov's past fights and identify their strengths and weaknesses. So coming into any fight, a fighter's going to know exactly what weaknesses their opponent has that they should look to exploit, but they're also going to know what their own weaknesses are, and as a result they may be aware of specific game plans and strategies their opponents can use to exploit their weaknesses, and then they can get ready for those strategies and tactics and make adjustments to make it more difficult for their opponent to exploit their own weaknesses. So that's why betting on MMA is very, very difficult. It's a game of heads up poker where both guys can see each other's hands, and so with the Chirico, very, very possible that he's continually tweaking in every fight. And this weekend, he's finally going to get it right and find that balance between the crazy aggressive style, the overly tactical style. He needs to find that middle point, the happy medium between the two styles. And I think the Chirico will then be a reasonably good middleweight that can hold his own in the UFC. Because from a skill for skill point of view, he's not bad. It's just his fight IQ, his pacing is off. So in terms of how these two guys match up stylistically, the one area where the Chirico does have a big advantage over Roman Kopylov is on the ground. We know that Kopylov's takedown offense is very bad. We know he's at a very low level on the ground. We've seen this in his first two fights in the UFC against both Jourdain and also Karl Roberson. When you're running into trouble on the ground against Roberson, you got real problems with how bad Roberson is on the ground. Now, the Chirico isn't a particularly skilled grappler, but you don't need to be when you're going up against someone like Kopylov, who is that bad on the ground. But the Chirico is a little bit like Marvin Vettori in that the more he grapples, the faster he gasses out. And as a result, you don't tend to see that much grappling from the Chirico these days. In his earlier fights, he did use a lot more grappling, but because it used to gas him out so fast, over the years he's kind of abandoned it. But if he did use grappling in this fight, he would likely have a decent amount of success with it. The question would be, at what cost does that come at? Because obviously he risks burning himself out. And Kopylov's gas tank is decent. Can't say Kopylov's gas tank's amazing. He slowed a little bit against Roberson and Duraev, but he had his nose crushed against Duraev and also faced a very difficult second round where Duraev took him down and dominated him on the ground. Obviously the fight against Roberson was his UFC debut. Never want to be too harsh on guys in their debut. So Kopylov can fight at a decent pace for 15 minutes. So the Chirico will be taking a big gamble if he grapples in this one, because he risks gassing himself out against what I believe to be a superior striker in Kopylov. So in terms of how these two guys match up when it comes to striking, the Chirico is very raw, very green, a little bit sloppy. He doesn't read his opponents particularly well, which makes him quite bad defensively. Kopylov is a much more technical, refined striker, much better defensively, understands distance, reads his opponents reasonably well, and as a result will have quite a big advantage on the feet. But there is danger in this matchup for Kopylov, because I don't feel he's as tactically aware as the Chirico. He's like the complete opposite of the Chirico, where Chirico is trying to be tactical and finish rounds strong to put his stamp on rounds. I feel like Kopylov is kind of oblivious to this stuff, and he's just going in there to have a kickboxing match and point fight and stand in front of his opponent and chip away at them. So he will be kind of susceptible for falling for the trap of allowing the Chirico to steal rounds and finish rounds strong. Having said that, Kopylov does fight at quite a high pace, does throw quite a high volume of strikes, so I do expect him to rack up a decent amount of volume and do good work for the majority of these rounds. I think he will outstrike the Chirico. It's just a question of whether the Chirico can steal rounds from him late on. So, good stylistic matchup. Summarising everything in this one, I do lean Kopylov here. I do think this is likely to be a stand-up fight, because we've said the Chirico's reluctant to use his grappling for fear of gassing out. And in a stand-up fight, Kopylov is just the superior striker. Having said that, I do think that the Chirico is likely to make adjustments to his game plan and strategy, which could make him more effective this time around. And because Kopylov is not that tactically aware, I also feel he could fall into the trap of allowing rounds to slip away from him when the Chirico kind of bum rushes him late on and looks to steal rounds from him. So I do lean towards Kopylov, because in a stand-up fight, he's the better striker. But the odds are in the even money odds range, because there's certainly ways in which the Chirico can win this and make it interesting. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if we get a very different version of the Chirico this weekend, because his fights over the last few years show that he's very open-minded and clearly experimenting with different styles, which makes it tricky to know what to expect from him. But it's a good stylistic matchup for Kopylov, and I think he'll probably get this done. I do lean towards him. Now let's talk about the next fight in this video, which is going to be John Makdessi against Nasrat Haqparast. So let's start off by taking a look at the odds on this one. So Haqparast is a pretty big favourite. Odds are around 1.44, which is minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. And if we take a look at the odds on John Makdessi, he's around an average of 2.90, which is going to be plus 190 for an implied probability of 34%. So Nasrat Haqparast has pretty much every single advantage you could want here in an MMA contest, which makes this a very difficult stylistic matchup for John Makdessi. If we start off by looking at the tail of the tape, we can see that Makdessi is 37 years old, 5'8" with a 68-inch reach, and Haqparast is 27 years old, 5'10" with a 72-inch reach. So straight away, there's some pretty big X factors favouring Haqparast. The first being the age. We can see that Haqparast is 10 years younger than John Makdessi, and we know that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time, 7-0, when there's a 10-year age gap in a fight, which is interesting because that is pretty much exactly what Haqparast's odds represent, carrying that implied probability of 69%. So even if you're just blind betting on that statistic, Haqparast wins this fight a very high percentage of the time. He's also got a very nice 4-inch reach advantage over Makdessi, and he's a little bit taller as well. A reach advantage is certainly going to help Haqparast a lot in this fight because it's likely to be a stand-up fight, and Haqparast is a boxer that fights long and knows how to use that reach. So, in terms of how these two guys match up from a stylistic point of view, we can quickly gloss over the grappling. It's kind of difficult to know how these two guys match up when it comes to grappling because you never see either of them try to take their opponents down. We know grappling is the Achilles heel for both guys, and as a result they very rarely initiate grappling. I know you can see Haqparast here mounting his opponent, but very, very rare you'll see Haqparast shoot a takedown. Same goes for Makdessi. Both these guys like to stand and bang. As a result, I would expect to see this fight predominantly take place on the feet, where Haqparast has a mainly boxing-based style of fighting. John Makdessi, a more kicks-based, taekwondo-based style of fighting, which makes for an interesting stylistic matchup. At this stage in their careers, Haqparast is a lot more technical than Makdessi, moves a lot better, is better defensively, and is a lot faster than Makdessi. I think if Haqparast comes in here and fights smart, he's going to pick Makdessi apart and outclass him. Makdessi doesn't move as well as he used to, doesn't read his opponents as well as he used to, and is not as good or as sharp defensively as he used to be. So I expect both these guys to stand right in front of one another. Makdessi's going to be a little bit lighter on his feet, but Haqparast likes the pressure guys, likes to walk them down, throws a high volume of strikes, a nice diverse range of attacks with good boxing combinations. I think he's going to do very well on the feet here against Makdessi. My one concern with Haqparast this weekend is that he is a little bit stubborn and quite hot-headed. Chael Sonnen's got this expression that when you try to win a fight by knockout, you often end up losing a decision. And I feel Haqparast beautifully reflects the point that Chael Sonnen is going to make, or is trying to make, because Haqparast is one of these guys that gets frustrated easily. When Haqparast is focused on being very technical, his boxing is so good, his combinations are so fluid, he's just so technical, he's a joy to watch. But he is very hot-headed, he is very stubborn, and if you start to have a little bit of success against him, very often he can start to headhunt, where he abandons his footwork and movement, abandons his combinations, stops setting strikes up, abandons his volume, and just starts to get into big exchanges and headhunt and look to load up on big shots. And when he does this, he's nowhere near as effective. And this happens to Haqparast a lot. We saw it happen in the Bobby Green fight, where he didn't really have a plan B once Bobby Green started to get the better of him in boxing. Haqparast just got more and more frustrated and just chose to load up more and more on big power shots, which played right into Bobby Green's hands because Green's great at reading opponents and could just slip shots and pick Haqparast off. We also saw it creep in the Rafa Garcia fight, and also late on in the Alex Munoz fight, where Munoz started to land some big shots just because Haqparast again started to headhunt and look for the knockout. So I do think Haqparast wins this fight a very high percentage of the time, but his fight IQ and his stubbornness bother me. And if he comes into this fight looking to make a statement, looking to knock Makdessi out, this fight could wind up being a lot closer than it needs to be, because Makdessi is no joke. You know, reasonably tough, reasonably skilled striker. He's experienced. He's going to be able to compose himself and stick to a game plan a lot more effectively than Haqparast is. So, great stylistic matchup for Haqparast. I think he wins a high percentage of the time. His odds reflect that. I'd be very surprised if he lost. But, bit of a risk factor to bet him as a big favourite, knowing how hot-headed he is and how he headhunts a lot and doesn't fight very smart a lot of the time. Fight IQ is one of the most important attributes in a fighter, and I feel it's an area that Haqparast is really lacking in. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight between two debutants, Jourdain, Errens and William Gomis. So let's start off by taking a look at the odds on this one. We can see that William Gomis is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.47, which is minus 227 for an implied probability of 68%. And if we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Jourdain Errens, he's around an average of 2.80, which is going to be plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. So William Gomis is 25 years old, 6 foot tall, with a 74-inch reach, and Jourdain Errens is 27 years old, 5 foot 11. We don't know what his reach is. So it's a bit of a tricky fight to break down this one, because Jourdain Errens is unlike I can't say he's unlike any other fighter I've ever researched before, but he's certainly very unusual, because Jourdain Errens in his recent fights has shown flashes of being absolutely brilliant, but unfortunately, to go along with those moments of brilliance, there are also gigantic weaknesses in his skill set, which often result in him either losing or struggling in fights more than he should. When you look at William Gomis, he's the complete opposite. He's not amazing, but what I like about Gomis is that he's very consistent. In all of the fights that I've seen of him, his fight IQ is good, his strategy and his game planning is good, and as a result, I would trust Gomis much more in a fight like this than I would trust Errens. I'm like 95% sure Gomis is turning up on Saturday night with a good game plan, good strategy, and a good plan to win. Errens, I'm not so sure. He's one of these guys that makes catastrophic mistakes in fights, and for that reason, he's very, very difficult to trust. So let's break down how these two match up from a stylistic point of view. Let's start off with grappling. It's probably the easiest aspect of this fight to break down. So, both guys have pretty bad takedown defense, and they're both also pretty weak off their back. The difference between the two is that Errens is one of these really frustrating guys that if you put him on his back, he doesn't really make much of an effort to work his way back up to his feet. He much prefers to just lay on his back, doing mostly nothing, and is incredibly infuriating to watch. If you take Errens down, you can rack up a lot of top control on him because he doesn't really try to improve his position on the bottom. Gomis is also very weak off his back. He's not a very skilled grappler at all. But what I like about Gomis is that for all of his weaknesses on the ground, he does show urgency in working his way back up to his feet. He does make a conscious effort to work his way back up to his feet, which is a lot more than can be said for Errens. So both guys super weak off their back, but Gomis slightly better in that department because he doesn't accept being on the bottom. Now, when it comes to being the aggressor in grappling, this fight gets really complicated. Let's start off by going through what Gomis brings to the table. He's a little bit easier to read. So Gomis' offensive wrestling is not great. You won't see him shoot a lot of takedowns, but he will occasionally look for takedowns to steal rounds, things like that. On the ground, his grappling control doesn't look particularly good, but what I like about Gomis is that he's able to inflict a lot of damage with his ground and pound. Very aggressive with his ground and pound. Lands real hard damaging shots from top position, and I like that about him. When it comes to Errens, this guy is very, very difficult to describe. When he's the aggressor on the ground, his grappling looks truly spectacular. He's got amazing grappling control, great transitions, brilliant back takes. He's a nightmare on the ground. But for whatever reason, he also makes catastrophic mistakes and gets very complacent. So if this fight goes to the ground, it's a really difficult one to read because while Errens is 10 times the grappler that Gomis is, he doesn't always make the best decisions, which costs him on the ground frequently. Remember at the beginning of the breakdown we were talking about how weak this guy is off his back. What's frustrating about Errens is when he's being the aggressor in grappling positions, he's a nightmare. But then if you put him on his back, he's an absolute pussycat. So he's a very unusual fighter and a difficult fighter to read, and not the kind of fighter I encounter very often. So if the fight does go to the ground, there's a very real risk that Errens could absolutely dominate Gomis and put on a grappling clinic, because when both these guys compete at their very best on the ground, Errens is a far better grappler than Gomis. The problem is that those moments of brilliance from Errens are very few and far between. And his ground game is for the most part, most of the time, very mediocre. And you know, a ground game that would not cause someone like Gomis too much of a problem. But if Errens shows up with a grappling heavy game plan, fights smart and is switched on, he is a far better grappler than Gomis, and I could see him dominating here. But, like I say, the guy also makes catastrophic errors on the ground, so very difficult to have any faith in him at all. Now, when it comes to striking, there's a lot to like about both of these guys. Jarno Errens is an aggressive pressure fighter that moves well, has good combinations, good technique, and I like what I see from him on the feet. You know, decent striking. Gomis lists his style as Wushu Sanda, but when I look at Gomis, he's got very much an MMA Muay Thai style, where he'll stand right in front of his opponents in that Muay Thai stance and look to chip away at them. He's more of a volume striker than a power striker, and he's a lot more of a counter striker as well. He's very reactive. He likes to react to what his opponent's doing. He likes to stand on the outside, wait for his opponents to come forward and attack him. He reads what they're giving him, and then he fires back and counters. What I like about Gomis is that for a young guy, he deals with pressure incredibly well. We know that pressure fighting is difficult to deal with, especially if you're young and inexperienced like Gomis at 25 years old with only 12 pro fights. But if you go back and watch Gomis' fight in Cage Warriors against Tobias Harila, you will be blown away by how well Gomis deals with the pressure of Harila, because for the entire fight, Harila walks Gomis down, puts tons of pressure on him, forces him to fight in an uncomfortable range, forces Gomis to fight at a high pace and exert tons of energy, and yet Gomis passes the test with flying colours by circling away from Harila for the entire fight and just chips away at him and looks absolutely brilliant in the process. Absolutely love Gomis and his composure on the feet. I think he can cause Errens big problems on the feet by just circling away from Errens, picking him off as he comes forward and chipping away at him. What I don't like about Gomis is that because he is a counter striker and very reactive, you often get long periods of inactivity from him where he doesn't do a lot. For that reason, I think against certain styles and certain opponents, he's going to find it difficult to put his stamp on rounds because he just doesn't do a lot most of the time. However, there are certain styles of opponents which will bring out the best in him, because again, he's waiting for his opponent to go first and make the first move so he can counter them. So against aggressive pressure fighters like Harila, like Errens, he's likely to look very good. And because Errens likes to come forward with a lot of aggression and force his opponents to engage, Gomis is going to be able to play that counter-striking game that he likes and circle away and pick Errens off. So he's likely to do pretty well this weekend, but I do think his style in the future likely to get him into quite a bit of trouble. So to summarise all of this, Gomis is the rightful favourite in this one, and I think he wins. He's got home advantage on his side. He's the superior striker, and even though Errens has shown flashes of being incredible on the ground, those flashes of incredible skills on the ground are very rare. Doesn't do enough of it. And like I say, Gomis is tough, he's scrappy, doesn't accept being in bad positions on the ground. He's always trying to improve his position, work his way back up to his feet. So Errens is going to really need to bring his A game on the ground to cause Gomis a problem with grappling. And it's very rare we see Errens bring his A game on the ground. For that reason, still lean Gomis here. So from a betting point of view, again, like a lot of fights on this main card, difficult from a betting point of view because Gomis is a real big favourite, and you know his odds reflect his chances of winning. I think this is one of those fights where the odds are pretty much where they should be. Gomis will likely win the fight if it takes place on the feet. You know, may struggle pretty bad if Errens comes in with a grappling heavy game plan, but you know Errens isn't particularly rock solid in that department, so you know, how much of a risk factor is it? I think the odds are roughly where they should be on this one. I'm not interested in betting on Gomis here. Too big of a favourite for me, especially with the fact that Errens can cause him big problems on the ground. But on the flip side, because Gomis is a far better striker than Errens, and because those flashes of brilliance from Errens on the ground are too few for me, can't take a shot on him either. But I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the final fight on this main card, which is one of the most interesting fights on this entire card from a betting point of view. Let's go through Charles Jourdain versus Nathaniel Wood. And if you do enjoy these breakdowns, if you like these breakdown videos, don't forget that you can find breakdowns for all the prelim fights on this card as well on my website, MMABettingTips.com. Link in the description below. I break down every single fight on every single UFC card on there. So if you find value on these breakdowns, you can support me and get more of them by becoming a member of my website, joining the community, and you can chat to my dumbass in the VIP chat room all day, where I spend like 8 to 10 hours in the chat room talking about betting different sports, betting strategies, upcoming fights, all that kind of stuff. But now, Charles Jourdain versus Nathaniel Wood. If we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Charles Jourdain is the slight favourite at average odds of around 1.71, which is minus 141 for an implied probability of 58%. Wood, on the other hand, is the underdog at average odds of around 2.20, which is plus 120 for an implied probability of 45%. Nathaniel Wood has bounced around between bantamweight and featherweight in the past. This fight is taking place at featherweight, which means Charles Jourdain will be a little bit bigger than Nathaniel Wood coming into this. Jourdain's 26 years old, 5'9" with a 69-inch reach. Wood, 29 years old, 5'6" with a 69-inch reach. So both guys roughly about the same age, roughly about the same size, but we know that Nathaniel Wood has got that shorter, more compact body type, whereas Charles Jourdain more of the longer, taller, rangier body type, even though he doesn't have a reach advantage in this. Interesting fight this. Both guys obviously predominantly strikers, and based on how the majority of their fights go, you would expect this fight to take place for the most part on the feet, where I think things could get very dicey for Nathaniel Wood. I think if this fight stays standing, Charles Jourdain will do really well. I love Nathaniel Wood. He's a British fighter. I'm from the UK, and I hope Nathaniel Wood has a really bright future in the UFC and a really successful career. But I think one thing that is going to hold Nathaniel Wood back, and something that's held him back up until this point in his career, is his desire to put on entertaining fights and be an entertainer, as opposed to an athlete who fights in the optimum way that gives him the best chance of winning. When you look at Nathaniel Wood, he's always talking about entertaining fans, putting on exciting fights, and pleasing the UFC. And for that reason, Nathaniel Wood never disappoints. You know, whenever you watch a Nathaniel Wood fight, it's always super entertaining. But this is a results business. And if Nathaniel Wood wants to have a successful career in the UFC, he needs to focus more on winning. Nathaniel Wood's problem is that he always comes to stand and bang. He always wants to entertain people. And because of that, he doesn't always necessarily fight in the safest and smartest way. Nathaniel Wood is tough as nails. He's got a granite chin. He's a great striker, good boxer, an absolute nightmare for most guys in this division. However, he also has some pretty big weaknesses. He's not the best defensively. He's not the best at reading his opponents. And while being very tough and having a great ability to recover quickly, he does get rocked, dropped, wobbled, and knocked down a lot. When you look at Charles Jourdain, very similar to Nathaniel Wood. He's aggressive, he's tough, he's scrappy, he loves to put on entertaining fights, he loves to stand and bang. But Jourdain is a far more technical, far more refined striker, far better defensively, and far better at reading his opponents than Nathaniel Wood is. One of the reasons why Nathaniel Wood gets dinged so frequently is because he often gets caught cold. You know that the old saying that the shots that knock you out are the ones you don't see coming. And Wood is the kind of guy that eats a lot of clean, hard shots, which is why he gets dinged a lot. Now, in terms of how these two guys match up on the feet, Nathaniel Wood is the better boxer. Charles Jourdain has a predominantly kicks-based style of striking, which means Wood can have success with his boxing here. The problem is Wood is better with his boxing offensively. He's better at punching guys in the face than Jourdain is. He's not as good defensively as Jourdain. Jourdain's quite elusive, moves well, not easy to hit. And while Jourdain isn't as skilled a boxer as Wood, he's probably more dangerous of a boxer than Wood. Wood is more of a volume striker. He likes to break you down with a high volume of strikes and pressure. Jourdain, on the other hand, more of a sniper. We've obviously seen him, almost finish Shane Burgos in the third round of his last fight, predominantly with his boxing. We saw him, score a big knockout over Doo Ho Choi. So very dangerous on the feet. We saw him finish Marcelo Rojo with punches as well. He's got a lot more power in his hands. A lot more dangerous, even if he's not as technical. But Jourdain's also got, very nice leg kicks, great body kicks, nasty head kicks. On the whole, he's just a lot more dangerous than Nathaniel Wood is. Nathaniel Wood is like a machine gunist. Jourdain, an absolute sniper. So on the feet, while I do see this being competitive and scrappy and having some back and forth, both guys having success, both guys landing shots, ultimately I think Jourdain's the more durable out of the two. I think he's the slightly more technical overall striker of the two, partly because of how much better he is defensively. I think Jourdain moves better as well, and I think he's much more dangerous on the feet. So in a stand-up fight, I think Jourdain does pretty well here. But I keep referencing that Jourdain is going to do well in a stand-up fight because, of course, this is mixed martial arts, not boxing. This is not kickboxing. This fight could take place in the clinch, on the ground, or on the feet. And as a result, Nathaniel Wood does have passed the victory here because he is a much better grappler than Charles Jourdain. Jourdain's takedown offense is very bad. His ground game is very low level. And this is something that doesn't appear to be improving that much. Yes, he landed a Hail Mary submission on Lando Venata, but his last fight against Shane Burgos shows that he still has big holes on the ground. Nathaniel Wood has good grappling control, decent offensive wrestling, a reasonably heavy top game. And if Nathaniel Wood comes into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, with how good his grappling is, how good his gas tank is, and his ability to persistently grapple hard for 3 rounds, I think he can dominate Jourdain on the ground, make this an easy night's work for him himself, and win very comfortably and very easily. But if we go back to what I said at the beginning of the breakdown, that ain't that likely to happen. Nathaniel Wood never uses grappling heavy game plans. If you can recall any situations in the past where you've seen Nathaniel Wood on the ground, in fights like when he fought Andre Ewell, you will often see him on the ground, not because he's initiated the grappling, but because he's scored a knockdown and jumped on top of his opponent, or maybe they've tried to take him down and then they've ended up getting into a grappling exchange which he's got the better of on the ground. Or maybe there's like a slip or a crazy scramble which winds up in Nathaniel Wood being on the ground. Wood very rarely tries to take guys down, and if he does try to take guys down, he rarely commits very hard to it. So if Wood were to come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, I think he'd do really well here. I think he'd beat Charles Jourdain if he grappled his ass off for 3 rounds. But that's pretty unlikely because Wood never fights like that. Like I said at the beginning of this breakdown, Wood loves to stand and bang. He loves to be an entertainer. He prides himself on the going to war and entertaining the fans. And as a result, a grappling heavy game plan isn't that likely from Nathaniel Wood here. He's an absolute dog that loves to get dragged into crazy brawls, and Charles Jourdain is a very, very good dance partner for that kind of fight. So to summarise, both these guys are in the even money odds range. If these two show up and perform like they usually do, where they like to stand and bang and go to war on the feet, I think that favours Charles Jourdain quite heavily. I think he wins a decent percentage of the time. Wood can make things interesting though if he uses a grappling heavy game plan, which he probably won't. So if you're betting this fight this weekend, I think you've got to go Jourdain. Based on past performances, it should be a stand-up fight. Jourdain, the better overall striker, and as a result, he's the one that would get my money this weekend. I hope you found that breakdown useful. And that's it for this video. Another breakdown video down. We'll be back next week for the breakdown for the Diaz Chimaev card. An amazing card. Some more great fights for us to break down. If you enjoyed this, please hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Check out my website, mabettingtips.com. Come join the live betting group if you're into that kind of thing. I think you'll like it. Like I say, if you don't, I'll just give you your money back anyway. Just get in touch and I'll do the refund. Anyway, till next time, guys, have a great weekend. I hope you crush it this weekend, make loads of money. I'll see you all next week. Nice one, guys. Bye.